Good afternoon. Welcome here at the last talk before lunch. We've got Maarten de Ruiter here on stage, who is a data scientist at Xomnia. With his background in econometrics and philosophy, he combines technical expertise with a critical thinking. And he's going to tell us about data governance in practice, or GenAI governance in practice. Give it up for Maarten.
Thank you. So thank you for joining today. It's quite a broad topic, quite a topic that gets a lot of different profiles together, being it developers or the more analytical or policy-oriented roles in an organization. Now, I can go on and on about how to come up with these policies and how to be compliant, but today I wanted to give you a bit more practical angle to certain issues you can face with regards to GenAI governance. I wanted to start off with this headline. I saw it a couple of weeks ago. And maybe just to kind of gauge the audience, who thinks this is true at this moment? Can I see a show of hands? All right, still quite some optimistic people. Maybe a different question, looking a few years into the future, who thinks this number will still hold? Will we still find that GenAI doesn't deliver on its promises? Okay, so there are even more optimistic people. Now, this study is quite broad, has quite a lot of assumptions regarding what is success, but I think this does represent kind of the number of successful cases we are seeing now. Only 5% actually getting the immediate return on investment that they promise. Because a lot of GenAI projects start off as a cool demo, maybe the tip of the iceberg that gets people attracted to work on it. But there are a lot of failure modes. I listed quite a few topics behind me here. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them, 3 that I am familiar with or done a bit more work on it in the few years that GenAI has been around in its current form. But yeah, ideally we would go from such a cool demo to something that runs in production and kind of ticks off all the boxes I'm showing behind me here. So why should you listen to me on this topic? As Nelson already said, I have a background in econometrics and philosophy, but kind of wandered out into the more qualitative world of language models, so not just numbers, but actually using embeddings to predict next tokens. And the properties and capabilities of these models have, of course, kind of surprised everyone in the last 5 years. Maybe now that we've seen a lot, they surprise us a bit less. But I've been working on them since basically GPT-1, fine-tuned, and even tried my hand at pre-training some of the smaller models for a variety of use cases and side projects. And currently, I am building and have built products in telecom, healthcare, logistics, and maritime industries. And also, I'm not only into computers, I do love some other things as well. So navigating maturity, we can get really complicated about it, but for these 3 pillars, I think it's about defining what your baseline is, and basically the step to manage, measured, and optimized levels within these pillars. So access and control. I'm not going to give the full definition, but in essence, we're trying to move away from shadow AI in your organizations. Users that aren't given the tools to do what they need and basically find them themselves. And this leads to all kinds of unwanted outcomes, like people dropping in sensitive information in ChatGPT or their tool of choice. So it is the responsibility of the organization, of you as a developer also, to give them the right tools to identify use cases, to prototype on these use cases, and later also to offer these in a very intuitive UI or form to the actual users. So the first practical thing is you want to enable self-service prototyping. Basically, you want to give them an environment that they can sandbox in, teach them about system prompts, structured outputs, and have business users look at the processes within the company with an eye for how to translate this into a GenAI or an LLM call, so to say. They don't have to think about it as an agent, because that's usually kind of a booby trap, I like to call them. Think about simple steps in processes that can be helped or supported by LLMs. Now, a tool we really like is OpenWebUI. We implemented this ourselves, and it's basically an open source version with all the cool gadgets that the enterprise platforms give you. I think a lot of you will be familiar with it, and you have a lot of different other open source tools that offer different feature sets. But this is the one we really like. It allows us to host local and, well, connect to managed models, make up or implement custom GPTs, and even connect custom pipelines in the form of more advanced agents. And it gives a really nice building block for building knowledge bases and also a UI to look at these. We found that companies that have something like this, and with the training they give to the users, are way more successful at identifying and prototyping or quick prototyping of use cases. So a business user can actually check themselves, hey, I can scan Excels or PowerPoint presentations at scale. Now, you can make it more advanced by connecting custom OCR, so you can actually look at markdown versions of documents that you upload. It has a lot of different possibilities that make it a really nice platform and building block. Now, I do want to note that I would invite you to think beyond chatbots and actually see where the users are doing their work. Because context switching is something that, yeah, kind of defeats the purpose of GenAI in a lot of cases. And you want to account for that by actually ingesting GenAI or LLM components into the workflow or applications that they're looking at. An example that I worked on myself is for a healthcare company using a chat application to interact with their patients, basically customer service for medical questions. And we found that besides this chat application, they also have to use, their medical information system and some other systems to aid their workflow and make sure everything is auditable. And we connected everything via a Chrome extension and custom buttons into one single UI that they mainly work on. So this helps that they do not have to switch from screen to screen, and they can leverage these LLM-generated responses, summarizations, and priority assessments in one application window. And this helps drive adoption, because if it's right there, people start using it, and you don't ask them to look up this custom GPT behind 3 layers of login screens, chatbot in a different tab. Next, and this is maybe more once you actually have some GenAI applications in production, you want to be able to quickly switch to the latest models, having it hosted on Azure, AWS, or something like Google Vertex AI. And with an API gateway, this becomes centralized. You can enforce policies like PII redaction, some safety and compliance standards right in this layer without having to always maintain this on your various hosting platforms. And then all your applications go through this API layer. You manage your API keys right there, and only like the people who are authorized to implement the deployments on the cloud platforms, they worry about, well, let's make sure there's something that we can pick into for a while. And in the API gateway, you basically apply a more granular distribution of how you want tokens for certain teams to flow. Yeah, so this is kind of your perfect place to implement your policy as code. I mean, I've seen a lot of cases where different teams were all working on PII redaction for their specific use case. And it makes way more sense to do this once and do it right. Even fine-tune the models, which is quite an effort. But if you do this and distribute it across all your applications via an API gateway, that's very beneficial. Unstructured data quality. I put a picture of a lot of text documents because that's what we're talking about. And we want to go from maybe a business team that does a big data dump to an actually curated knowledge base. What I mean by that is there aren't tens of thousands of versions of these different documents, and you only work with the latest, most fresh, correct, consistent information. Now, we recently deployed an MVP for our knowledge agent. It's called Genie. And we ask it about past cases and consultant availability, because that's kind of our bread and butter. But it works really nicely with the React framework. It thinks through your query, looks at what tools it has to use, like the availability in our Trello, and then also getting the right resume in the right language for the specific consultant or consultants under consideration. So let's say I was up for a project. We can ask it, does Maarten have AWS experience? And it will answer the question based on my resume and would also state if I'm actually available. Now, I suspect, because I've seen this at other clients, that we will hit conflicting knowledge, because I only update my Dutch CV when I'm actually up for a project which requires a Dutch CV. So my English resume is always up to date, but my Dutch one isn't. Now, these conflicts can really destroy your RAG pipeline, because they are very similar, and they will be attached to the same query or retrieved for the same query about my AWS experience. And this leads to ambiguous answers where maybe our account manager still has to go in and find if I actually do have this AWS experience, or reach out to me to ask me. So how do we find these issues at scale? And this is a problem I've been working on for quite some time now. I've also looked at vendor solutions in the market. And my recommendation is that you run a data quality experiment. Maybe only on a small part of your vector databases or SharePoints. It can be 10, 20, 50 documents, depending on how many chunks you have. And run a similarity search for each of these chunks. And maybe set a threshold, so you only end up with the ones that are most similar. Now, these form candidate pairs, because they are talking about the same thing. Of course, this is embedding space, so they can talk about a lot of different things, but we can still find similarities even if they do not agree. And it makes sense to actually check these similar chunks for redundancy. Of course, there are smarter ways to do this than with an LLM, like hashing and other clustering techniques. But very similar content is also dangerous, even if it isn't necessarily an exact duplicate, like different tone of voice, maybe external communication and how that's internally managed. And after that, after you've found and identified redundant content, you can continue with a contradiction check. If these aren't exact duplicates or similar content, see if they have disagreeing statements in them. And this really helps to, before you ingest or when you have ingested stuff into your vector database, to identify statements which aren't matching and which may lead to downstream implications or bad performance. So one example for this would be well, my Dutch CV says I don't have AWS experience, while my English CV does. Let's say our account manager asks about my AWS experience. It's going to find these conflicting statements, right? And this would have been flagged if I basically run it through a simple contradiction prompt. Don't mind the quality. This is pure example. And I would suggest to make this way more tailored to your use case. But in essence, it comes down to passing two chunks to a function and basically running them through a prompt with instructions and additional context for your use case, and asking it whether there is a contradiction. If you let it output or have the output given in structured format with confidence levels and identification of the statements which are contradicting, you'll be surprised at the results that you'll find if you take a large enough knowledge base. Well, same goes for redundancies. I see over here I only have it for full and partial duplicates, but you can, of course, add to your likeness if there's similar content or anything like that. Again, these confidence levels actually help seeing the forest through the trees, trees through the forest, because an LLM will identify a lot of issues just because there isn't enough context or there's context cutoff, a disclaimer for statements above is there. And by first focusing on the highly confident identified issues, you can prioritize and basically come up with a baseline to define further actions. That might be actual manually going through your data that goes in there, or when you identified multiple issues for certain metadata partitions, you can basically say maybe it's better if we actually remove this from our vector database or come to some form of single source of truth. Now, my final topic, it's about LLM ops and monitoring. Yeah, I put it here as the good old print statement. I think that's where a lot of us started off. Especially, I remember myself working in Pi notebooks. Yeah, this is basically what I know. However, now that I'm working on more complex workflows and pipelines, I really see the need actually for everybody to have this in place. Yeah. So the first thing that you want is some sort of platform or tool that helps you look at traces. Maybe at first you're only looking at total token costs and usage, whereas you actually see way more in a breakdown when you include tool calls, include RAG calls, whatever, and you can actually see, all right, did the right information go in at this step? Why did it miss it? Do I need to make my description of my tools more elaborate, more including more edge cases, etc. Now, a platform like LangFuse that we implemented ourselves to help evaluate and optimize Genie, it also allows you to regularly or continuously test on a golden data set. This is something, for now, we created synthetically, just because it's quite some manual work to do, and you also need to validate it yourself. But as like a first baseline to put some metrics against, like faithfulness to the prompt, completeness of the answer, and whether it's retrieving the right content, and even some custom things you can implement. Now, ideally, you would continuously test for this, but of course, it's mainly useful during experimentation and development to make sure your prompt actually makes sense. Other tools like DSPy, which help you, I think they call it programming LLMs themselves, can also use golden data sets that you curate maybe via your LLM ops platform with certain feedback loop rules. But it makes sense to also do this continuously as your application is live. You update models, your knowledge evolves. So yeah, I think the classic "you can't measure, can't manage what you can measure" holds true here. Now, a golden data set, yeah, must be a dynamic asset. I don't know how many people have experience with building golden data sets. Any show of hands? Maybe, was this an easy process? No? And did you do this once, or do you do this continuously? Yeah, I see some faces nodding. I did this once. Yeah, that's kind of my experience as well. Why is it so hard? You have to combine first all the distinct sources and generate edge case prompts. Yeah, I call them rare entities, paraphrases of certain queries that can maybe yeah, not understand the model. What exactly are you asking? But yeah, only going for distinct sources is kind of like testing your code against unit tests, while the integration tests are actually maybe a more important part. Multiple sources yeah, require a lot more optimization into an answer than just single source answers. Yeah, and once you have this golden data set and update it continuously, the human validation part actually becomes quite a big task. Ideally, you want to keep adding to this knowledge base as your knowledge evolves. So having certain triggers in place to create new synthetic Q&A pairs for human validation, let's say once my resume is updated. And maybe you want to appoint owners for this. I know the best what my resume looks like, and not the people around me. So it makes sense to have very specific responsibility with this, in regard with this. And the nice thing, again, with this golden data set is that you can optimize. Yeah, and if you do not do this and only have one static data set in place, you'll not catch the performance drift as well. Or you'll see, yeah, like wrong answers popping up while you still think you're doing good, good on the back end. So what it boils down to then, I want to invite you to maybe this quarter, maybe next quarter, pick a domain, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one of these, and kind of map where you're currently at. And also what I filled in these cells here, does it have to be true for you? I mean, if your business processes are not really lenient for shadow AI, it might be not a problem at all, and you just want to focus on getting one single application up and running and not necessarily an entire platform for prototyping. Also, I'm not advocating that everybody should be at the optimized level before putting any applications online, but keeping those in mind while you're building them and learning about building them. You can make a lot of architectural choices before you start implementing these, as opposed to once you have things up and running and you're out of options because you didn't consider the design choices up front. Regarding my data quality experiment, I want to reiterate, this is really interesting for you to see. And also, if you do this, you actually have some baseline to compare vendors against. Small anecdote is that, well, I thought I was up against this entire SaaS company, and I was building a prototype basically for the exact same thing. And we were finding a lot of issues, also a lot of false positives. But in the end, it turned out that because we were using this brute force approach of really comparing every chunk based on similarity, running them through a bit more advanced prompts than I was showing you, we were basically able to outperform them, and we only have the scalability left to solve, and we will actually begin working on that probably the coming year. I guess that's actually it. I'm a bit quicker than I expected. You may have seen us at the booth up front. Please come visit us. We are wearing the nice blue sweaters with the Xomnia logo on them. I'm happy to take questions already, or we can wait another 5 minutes.
I think it's perfect time to take questions. First off, thank you for your talk. Let's see, questions. There's a mic coming to you.
Hi, I have a question about creating a golden data set. Do you actually have humans doing this for every single example, or do you also leverage AI to support and create more use cases, edge cases, etc.?
Yeah, good question. I think in an ideal world, we would actually have humans curate this. But a synthetic data curation approach has a few advantages and actually only requires humans at the end to validate answers and maybe to make answers more complete or check why they're not complete because of missing knowledge. And that could be a trigger to add more knowledge to the database. But what it could come down to is you giving some very diverse examples of the types of queries we expect. For instance, does ... have experience with? Do we have any past cases that? And by giving these examples and then iterating over all your knowledge or part of your knowledge in the data set based on some random heuristic, you generate these examples and actually take the answer from the document to answer it. And usually this really speeds up the workflow because it's almost always there, the answer. Maybe some hallucination in there that has to be corrected. But I think, that's the way to go. And as if you catch issues before you start curating this golden data set, the process actually becomes easier because there are less mismatches in the data beforehand, meaning your golden data set will actually give correct answers, and you won't have to go back to solve the issues that were there to begin with. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. My question is around data quality monitoring. So do you have any tool recommendations for data quality on vector databases?
Yeah, so you mean unstructured data, so textual data?
Yeah.
I would have loved to recommend the SaaS tool I was investigating. I won't name names because that's not so nice. No, but at the moment I actually recommend to try your hand at it yourself because you already probably have pipelines set up. You already have applications set up connected to knowledge bases, maybe ingesting data automatically, and finding issues is really context specific. Some content might not have links, for example, and you want to check for functional links if you do have them. For some companies, checking for outdatedness or like the freshness of documents might be really trivial because they have really up-to-date metadata, while others need to get their metadata fixed first. So I would recommend running an experiment, maybe with the true prompts as kind of inspiration as I showed you. Do it on a small data set. You can kind of calculate the amount of tokens you're going to need by taking the number of chunks, multiplying by the number of tokens on average, and then cutting it in half because similar content will end up like A, B, and B, A, and you only need to compare them once. And if you do have these findings, you can kind of gauge, hey, how big is this problem actually? And you have some baseline to measure vendors against. So yeah, I would recommend starting with that. And depending on whether you have 1 million documents in a vector database or only a few thousand or 10,000, yeah, I guess you can define actions like whether you can solve the scalability issue yourself or whether you need a platform which specializes in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. Let's assume that we have achieved optimized data quality in a project and we implemented this knowledge agent. We have no golden data set, but we have the content owner or expert randomly attend this on performance question asking, and that person would rate each question in that case, and we feed that data into our model or configuration. What would be the difference between this measurement and with a golden data set in the behind?
So just so I understand you correctly, you mean we don't have a golden data set, but we have a system in production and we have an expert checking the output and rating that? Is that what you're?
Yes.
And what would be the benefits of both? I guess by just having an expert actually validating the output, you are going to find a more realistic estimate because it's based on the knowledge as it is feeding the answers. The problem with that is that edge cases and rare entities often don't come up that much. That's why they're called edge cases or rare entities, and you do want quite a few of these in your golden data or like your benchmark set to make sure you catch these. That's why I think we're seeing the benchmark performances of LLMs drop off because the trivial cases are solved. Actually, the hard ones are still left to solve. And how many PhD problems is somebody going to ask to an LLM? Maybe quite a few, but you can understand that a lot of trivial questions, by definition, will show up a lot more, and it might be quite a lengthy process before you have enough edge cases to get a good assessment. I guess keeping it static or dynamic by updating it periodically is a bit more quantitative way of going about it. But it does make sense to catch new edge cases that you haven't caught yet, and you can also set up triggers to check your actual answers. Instead of a human going over it, you can maybe have a classifier identifying whether it is an edge case, and a human should look at it. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. You briefly covered the LLM proxies and safeguarding. I'm curious, how far did you go there and what do you use?
It's actually an example of a colleague of mine, but she showed me. I believe she used an API gateway in Azure, and currently they are in the process of implementing their policy as scripts or functions to basically serve as a proxy between the applications and the deployments, the actual deployments. And she sees this as really beneficial because it kind of unifies everything into a single layer, working with different deployments on different platforms. I've seen this in other forms like Light LLM. There are also a bit more open source tools available to route your requests and maybe also give the user the option to choose from things that are available. But it really depends also on your setup and if people already have certain things in place for specific deployments or applications. Sorry.
And for safeguarding?
For safeguarding, you mean guardrails, like harmful outputs, etc.?
You mentioned probably leaking of some sensitive information, or asking something which is not proper. So, did you mean that by safeguarding?
Yeah. You can think in that direction, but it really depends on what your compliance looks like. I know of public organizations that that work with social security numbers, very private information, medical companies, of course. There's a lot of sensitive information in that kind of data. You can instruct smaller local models or use Python packages to filter out any of this sensitive information, but also to detect maybe harmful information in the output before giving it back. But it's mainly a compliance tool, and a lot of that has been solved with platforms like Azure offering EU data zone deployments, which have different processing, what do I call it? Processing requirements than, let's say, the global deployments available in AI Foundry or Bedrock. So I kind of hope that answers your question. Or maybe we can connect later if you want to explain a bit more. Okay.
Yes.
Anyone else? Or?
I think that's all we have time for.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll be around, or one of your colleagues at Xomnia,
Yeah.
so if there's any other
You can find me
questions,
there.
find them at the booth. I would say it's time for lunch. Thank you all for sticking around, and a final hand